Bon matin, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. I am Stephanie Levitz with the Globe and Mail. I will be moderating this morning. Before we begin, a few important preventative measures to share to prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback, incidents that can cause injuries. We remind all in-person participants to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose you will find on the table. There's additional guidance on the table to help prevent audio feedback injuries, and let's recall that all of these measures are in place to protect the health and safety of our very valuable interpreters. And with that, I will turn the microphones over to our trio of ministers this morning who have some remarks and announcements to share. We will then open the floor for questions, as is our custom, one question, one follow-up. If there's time, we will go to reporters online, but we will start in the room. Et maintenant, à vous.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to start on a very celebratory note. And I really want to start by congratulating the amazing Jeff Hinton on his Nobel Prize. He is a great Canadian. He is absolutely brilliant. He happens to be a constituent of mine. And he really, as an intellectual, in addition to really being the father of AI, is the teacher of generations of great Canadian intellectual leaders who have been taught by him, learned from him at the U of T. What a wonderful accomplishment. And I also want to say, first of all, to Jeff, congratulations. Thank you very much. This is an honor which is richly deserved, and I think I speak for all Canadians in saying we are so proud of you and so grateful to you. And what I also want to say about Jeff is, in addition to being absolutely brilliant, he really cares. He cares about his community, he cares about Canada, and he cares about the world. And we are really lucky in our country to have such a brilliant person who also really cares deeply. He's also a great neighbor, a great father, just a great person to have in our community. Okay, that's just something I'm very glad to be able to recognize at the beginning of this press conference. Okay, alors, je vous parlerai de nouvelles mesures prises pour notre gouvernement pour construire de nouveaux logements. Le ministre Jean-Yves Duclos vous parlera des derniers ajouts à la Banque du terrain public du Canada, un programme très important qui continue. Et après ça, le ministre Terry Beech vous parlera des retombées de ces mesures pour les Canadiennes et les Canadiens. I do want to start by talking for a moment about the good economic news we've been having in recent weeks. Canada is leading the G7 in achieving a soft landing after the COVID recession. Inflation fell to 2% in August. That is a 42-month low, and it means that for all of this year, inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range. Thanks to that inflation trajectory, the Bank of Canada led the G7 in cutting rates. Canada was the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the first time. We were the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the second time. And we were the first G7 country to cut interest rates for the third time. Wages have been outpacing inflation for 19 months in a row now. What all of that means for Canadians is their paychecks are going further. And for people who own a home and have a mortgage that is coming up for renewal, the fact that interest rates are coming down is a source of really great relief. Maintenant, sur nos annonces, we are announcing today new rules about secondary suites, and we're issuing technical guidance for lenders and insurers to offer refinancing for secondary suites. These will come into force on January 15th. The idea here is to make it easier for people to build a secondary suite in their home, for someone to build a basement flat, a garden flat, laneway housing. This is all about gentle density, creating more homes for Canadians to live in. It builds on the secondary suite loan program, which was announced in the budget. Specifically, we're going to allow refinancing of insured mortgages to build a secondary suite in your home. You will be able to access up to 90% of the home value, including the value added by the secondary suite, and you will be able to amortize your refinanced mortgage for up to 30 years. The limit for insured mortgages, if you are building a secondary suite, will be $2 million, and that will be particularly important, recognized, and is a recognition of conditions in the GTA in the Lower Mainland. This is really about giving Canadian homeowners the opportunity to be part of our great national effort to build more homes faster. It's to let a family who already own a home and maybe would like their grandmother or grandfather, or both of them, to move in with them, to give them access to a little bit more money to build that basement flat, to build that garden suite, so that grandparents can move in. It's also maybe about grandparents who have a big house, maybe are rattling around alone in that house, and maybe they'd like a grandchild to be able to move in with them, maybe go to school. This is about making it easier for them to build that extra space. And we see this as a measure which goes alongside other measures that we've put in place, designed for the big builders to get more homes built faster, to get more rental units built. This is about saying regular Canadians should have the ability and access to the financing to build gentle density in their neighborhoods, to build density that their families and their communities need. Le deuxième annonce, c'est une consultation pour une taxe sur les terrains vacants. Nous pensons que les bons terrains ne doivent pas être inutilisés. L'Irlande, par exemple, a une mesure comme cela. On annonce aujourd'hui une consultation avec les municipalités, les provinces et les territoires pour discuter si on a besoin d'une telle mesure chez nous au Canada. Et l'objectif, comme tous nos objectifs concernant le logement, c'est de bâtir plus de logements plus vite. On sait que le Canada a besoin de cela. We know that one of the most pressing issues for Canada, for Canadians, is housing. And we know that the center of that issue, the center of the solution, needs to be to get more homes built faster. Today's announcements are, another arrow in our quiver of measures to get more homes built faster in Canada. This is about getting 4 million homes built. I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague Jean-Yves Duclos. À vous la parole, Monsieur le Ministre.
Merci, chère Chrystia, et bonjour tout le monde. Comme on sait, l'inflation est maintenant sous contrôle et les taux d'intérêt sont à la baisse, mais les familles de la classe moyenne continuent d'être confrontées à la crise de l'abordabilité et à toutes sortes d'autres défis liés au coût de la vie. Et il est évident que le logement est au cœur de ces défis et de ces préoccupations. Les options en matière de logement disponibles, accessibles et abordables sont en particulièrement limitées pour de nombreux jeunes Canadiens et Québécois qui nous écoutent. Nous voulons donc rétablir la promesse du Canada de l'équité entre les générations pour que l'accès au logement abordable redevienne à la portée des jeunes familles de la classe moyenne. C'est pourquoi nous avons présenté, lors du budget de l'an dernier, le plan le plus ambitieux en matière de logement des 40 dernières années. Utiliser judicieusement les terrains fédéraux pour construire non seulement des logements abordables, mais des communautés plus fortes et plus inclusives est une partie importante de ce plan. En août dernier, nous avons ainsi lancé la Banque de terrains publics du Canada, qui comprenait 56 propriétés fédérales désignées comme pouvant accueillir des logements. Et nous avons alors signifié clairement qu'il s'agissait seulement d'une première étape. Aujourd'hui, nous honorons notre promesse en ajoutant 14 nouveaux terrains et édifices fédéraux afin de bâtir des communautés plus fortes et construire plus de logements abordables pour les Québécois et les autres Canadiens. Cela devrait mener à la construction de 7600 logements additionnels. Par exemple, nous libérons 3 immeubles du gouvernement canadien situés sur la rue Dalhousie, à Québec, en plein centre de ma circonscription, un ancien immeuble de l'Agence du revenu du Canada situé à St. John's à Terre-Neuve et un édifice historique situé au 210 rue Laurier, tout juste ici à côté à Gatineau. Last August, we launched the Canada Public Land Bank, which included 56 federal properties designated for housing. And we have made it clear at that time that this was only a first step. Today, we are honoring our promise by adding 14 new lands and buildings to build stronger communities and more affordable homes for Quebecers and other Canadians. This should lead to the construction of approximately 7,600 additional homes. For example, we are vacating a former National Defense building in Vernon, British Columbia, as well as 3 properties here in Ottawa, close to Herdman Station. Those 3 properties in particular will allow the construction of more housing units easily accessible by public transit. Lorsque possible, ces terrains fédéraux demeureront publics en mettant en place des baux à prix modiques afin de réduire les coûts de construction et de soutenir la création de plus de logements abordables. Nous voulons ainsi que les fournisseurs de logements puissent investir davantage de leurs ressources et de leur argent dans la construction d'habitations abordables sans devoir assumer le coût initial de l'acquisition du terrain. This novel and ambitious plan also includes working with Indigenous peoples, all levels of government, home builders and housing providers to build homes on surplus and underused public lands across the country. Pierre Poilievre n'a construit que 6 logements abordables lorsqu'il était ministre responsable du logement. Son plan pour les immeubles fédéraux, c'est simple, incluant les immeubles de CBC Radio-Canada, c'est de les offrir aux plus offrants sans préoccupation aucune pour l'abordabilité ou l'accessibilité. Et en plus, Pierre Poilievre dit que c'est une forme de communisme que de construire des logements abordables sur les terrains fédéraux. Notre plan est très différent. Les 70 terrains qui se trouvent maintenant dans la Banque de terrains fédéraux permettent de construire jusqu'à 33 000 logements additionnels. Et il s'agit seulement d'une seule étape qui permettront de bâtir plus de 250 000 logements d'ici 2031 sur des terrains fédéraux. Merci et je passe maintenant la parole à mon cher collègue Terry Beech.
Well, thank you, Jean-Yves. Thank you, Chrystia. It's great to be here talking about housing in Ottawa because I spend a lot of time in my constituency talking about housing with constituents, whether they be young families, whether they be small business owners. There's a lot of economic uncertainty that comes from not having an affordable place to live. Today's measures are another good step in reaching our goal of building 4 million incremental new homes by 2031, and a continuation of a national housing strategy that is unprecedented and historic in its scope, scale, size, and ambition. The secondary suites measures that are announced today coincide not only with previous federal measures that are helping to get more suites built, but measures that other provincial and municipal governments are making to incentivize the increased number of what Chrystia referred to as gentle density, but what it really means is incentivizing the private construction of more units of housing. And that's a win-win. It's a win because it creates more housing, but it's also a win because it creates more opportunities to make life more affordable for Canadians. With regards to the public lands, this is another step in reaching our goal of incrementally increasing the housing stock by another 250,000 units. Now that's just a little over 6% of the entire strategy, but it's a significant part of it, and I think it demonstrates that our government is committed to looking under every rock and providing every tool when it comes to meeting our unprecedented goals in this space. With regards to things that we are already doing, the National Housing Strategy is now over $115 billion. It is a 10-year plan, and it is looking to provide every tool alongside our partners in provincial, municipal, and Indigenous governments, the nonprofit sector, and of course the private sector, to meet these lofty goals. In fact, it is so large and unprecedented, it is quite difficult to articulate. I think one of the best ways to articulate how significant this is to comment on the contrast between our approach and the approach of the previous government that Jean-Yves has already commented on. The Leader of the Opposition, as housing minister, produced 6 units of affordable housing. I want to be very clear. That's not 6 buildings. That's not 6 towers. That's not 6 complexes. That's 6 units, 6 kitchens, 6 toilets. With a number that small, you have to question whether he successfully built 6 units of housing or he failed to stop 6 units of housing from actually being built. In contrast, I'm not the housing minister, but because of the National Housing Strategy, just this summer, in Burnaby North Seymour, the riding I represent in British Columbia, I announced the construction of 1,147 new units of affordable housing and the repair of 2,091 affordable units. And that's just in the riding of Burnaby North Seymour, one of 338 ridings across the country. So when you contrast that with 6 units across the entire country, that's 539 times more productivity just this summer, just in one riding. And we have programs like this that are being utilized right across the country. And the contrast doesn't actually end there. When it comes to purpose-built rental construction, under the previous government, construction was flat for 10 years. In the first 3 years that we were in government, we actually increased that amount by more than double. And every single year, that's continued to increase until today, where we are now producing more than 4 times more purpose-built rentals every single year, and that delta continues to increase. And yet, the Conservatives' answer is to berate municipalities and to put a 5% tax back on purpose-built rental construction. So, I guess to conclude, the National Housing Strategy is doing its job, but there is more work to do. But Canadians have a lot of reasons to be optimistic. It's not just the federal government going alone anymore. We are seeing housing plans come out from provinces and territories across the country. We are seeing municipalities step up. We are seeing the private sector bringing new technology to the fore. And because of the fiscal management, we are seeing, as Chrystia mentioned, an improving inflationary environment, an improving interest rate environment. And as interest rates continue to fall, that's going to make the National Housing Strategy all the more impactful, and it's going to improve the balance sheets not only for Canadian families, but for private developers who are looking to get more units built as well. So there's reasons to be optimistic, but there's obviously more work still to do.
Thank you very much, ministers. We'll now move on to the question and answer portion of our morning. Again, I reiterate, 1 question and 1 follow-up, s'il vous plaît, and we will begin with Brian Platt.
Hi, Minister Freeland. Brian Platt with Bloomberg. From what I can tell, since Parliament came back, the government has been trying to pass its capital gains Ways and Means motion, and it needs to pass this before it wants to pass this before it introduces legislation. It's been delayed because of the privilege motions in the House, or the privilege debates. Are you getting worried that you may not have time to pass this capital gains legislation? There's obviously a ticking clock on this Parliament. Are you worried you're going to run out of time? And if so, what do you intend to do about that?
No, I'm not. I have confidence that at the end of the day, all of us who have the huge privilege of serving Canadians in Parliament need to and will recognize that our job when we come to Parliament is to work for Canada and Canadians. And that means not wasting precious parliamentary time with dilatory motions. It means having real debates about real issues and then getting down to a vote. And on the legislation you mentioned, we had a vote in June. There was a clear majority of MPs elected by Canadians in support of that measure, and I'm confident that we will be able to proceed. I really think, I think Canadians do not like their parliament being made into a spectacle. I think Canadians do not like Parliament behaving in a way that, as a mother, I would consider totally unacceptable if my kids told me that was happening in the playground or the gym at school. It is just, it's not okay. We have serious disagreements in Parliament, and everyone here is prepared to debate the issues seriously and reasonably. And I am prepared, I think reasonable people can disagree with the specific policies we put forward, and I am happy, and all of us are happy to debate them on the merits of each of our policies. But what we're seeing the Conservatives try to do to our House of Commons, turn it into a place where the currency is not real debate. The currency is, nursery school insults, and the currency is dilatory motions. I think that really cheapens our country and cheapens our democracy. And I really have faith that Canadians are not amused, are not impressed by this, and that the majority of working with the majority of parliamentarians, we will succeed in moving past this.
I also want to ask you about the economy. You talked this morning about inflation being low and interest rates falling, but the flip side of that is that the labor market is worsening, and it does stand in contrast to the U.S., where they had a big surprise increase in jobs last week. Are you worried about Canada's labor market? Are you worried about where this is heading right now? Because that is the reason why interest rates are falling at the moment, is because the labor market is weakening.
Well, actually, interest rates have come down because the Bank of Canada has taken a decision to move interest rates down. And I will refer you to the Bank of Canada's rationale for lowering rates. But the bank does tend to be very focused on where inflation is in its decisions on interest rates. Look, I think that we have had a lot of very important and very positive macroeconomic news in recent months. Most important has been what has happened with inflation. Inflation has been really painful for Canadians. Every single one of us sitting here has heard about the pain that inflation has caused our constituents. And so the fact that inflation has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for the past 8 months is a really big deal, 2% in August. It is also the case that interest rates rose at a historically fast level and to a high level given recent experience, and that interest rates moved up to a really contractionary place. Notwithstanding the 3 interest rate cuts, interest rates are still, as the bank has said, and as the universal consensus of Canadian economists is, that interest rates remain at a contractionary level. Interest rates are not at neutral. And anyone who speaks to a Canadian family or to a Canadian business will hear from that family and from that business that having interest rates that are still contractionary is having a real impact on Canada and Canadians. I think it's also a truth universally acknowledged, and Brian, you will hear this from every single Canadian economist you talk to, that the structure of the Canadian mortgage market is different from the structure of the U.S. mortgage market. The fact that we tend to have 5-year mortgages rather than 30-year mortgages means that interest rate increases are passed through to regular Canadians much more quickly, and that weighs on the spending capacity of Canadian households, and it also then weighs on the consumption of Canadian households. So Canadian small businesses feel it, and they feel it and have been particularly feeling it when it comes to the capacity of Canadians to consume services. So that's kind of where I see the inflation and interest rate dynamic. Certainly, jobs and incomes are something we watch really, really closely. One of our focuses during COVID was to try to help Canadian businesses preserve as many jobs as possible. We didn't want people out on the streets. We didn't want them to lose their connection to their job. And one of our focuses post the COVID recession has been to help get more jobs back faster. And I'm really glad that we have 1.3 million more jobs in Canada than we had before COVID. And I'm especially glad that for 19 months, wages have been outpacing inflation. But getting back to the start of your question, if your question is, do I still have concerns about the macro environment? For sure. I think it is very important to respect the independence of the Bank of Canada, and I certainly do. But I think your question points to some pressures that the economy is still facing at a time when interest rates are still, meaningfully above their neutral level.
Thank you. Le prochain, Fanny.
Merci. Bonjour. Peut-être une question pour M. Duclos, mais Mme Freeland, si vous voulez embarquer, vous êtes plus que bienvenue de le faire. Je voudrais revenir sur cette question de l'obstruction, en fait. Selon les conservateurs, si vous remettiez tout simplement les documents qu'ils demandent concernant ce fonds vert là, qui a été critiqué par la vérificatrice générale, les tactiques dilatoires s'arrêteraient. Alors, ma question est toute simple. Pourquoi ne pas tout simplement donner ces documents?
Bien, il y a deux raisons principales. La première, c'est que le président s'est déjà prononcé sur cette question. Il a dit que la bonne chose à faire, c'était d'étudier cette question en comité. Et la deuxième chose, c'est que la raison pour laquelle le président le dit si clairement, c'est que la GRC l'avait déjà dit avant. Lorsque les politiciens se mêlent des affaires policières et judiciaires, ça ne fait que rendre le travail des forces policières plus difficile. Ce sont dans les républiques de bananes que les politiciens qu'on voit dans la Chambre des communes se comportent de cette manière. Lorsque les politiciens tentent d'influencer les opérations policières, non seulement ça complique ce travail des policiers, mais ça rend les résultats pires. Alors, je pense que les conservateurs ont intérêt à comprendre non seulement ce que le président, mais ce que la GRC leur a déjà signifié clairement.
Vous avez, pour faire cesser ces tactiques dilatoires, est-ce que vous avez commencé à envisager imposer un bâillon et, si oui, avec quel parti vous aimeriez vous allier pour imposer ce bâillon?
Mais comme Chrystia l'a dit tout à l'heure, les Canadiens ne s'intéressent pas aux jeux politiques des conservateurs. Les Canadiens veulent que les élus qui ont la chance et la responsabilité de travailler pour eux fassent leur travail. Alors, cette tactique conservatrice d'essayer de faire comme si le Canada était brisé, que la démocratie était brisée, que la Chambre des communes était brisée, cette tactique ne fonctionne pas. Ça ne fait qu'accroître le cynisme des gens envers le travail essentiel que doivent faire les politiciens. Alors, il faut que les conservateurs se ressaisissent et arrêtent de mettre des bâtons dans les roues de la GRC, des forces policières et du gouvernement canadien qui doit faire son travail. Maintenant, quand ça va arrêter, ça, j'en ai aucune espèce d'idée parce qu'on est dans un gouvernement minoritaire, on a besoin de l'appui des partis de l'opposition pour faire quoi que ce soit. Moi, j'invite les bloquistes et le NPD qui comprennent à quel point ces tactiques des conservatrices sont ridicules, de mettre leur culotte et de dire, écoutez, ça doit cesser et on doit faire les choses que les Canadiens et les Québécois nous demandent de faire.
Et je suis d'accord avec Jean-Yves. Comme toujours.
Rachel?
Hi, Rachel Haynes from CTV News. Minister Freeland, the bloc demand remains the same about the OAS, but your government didn't support their motion last week, and I'm going to put something to you that Minister Duclos said yesterday, which is what the bloc is proposing is not the right way to proceed because it gives more money to affluent seniors than to low-income seniors. Has your government shut the door completely on this demand?
So as I said, I always agree with Jean-Yves. We actually work very closely together, a collaboration, a partnership that was really forged during COVID in the COVID committee. What I would say about the bloc is we believe truly in having an open door to cooperation with all parties in Parliament. And we have been having some very productive, very sincere conversations with the bloc. In fact, Jean-Yves and our House Leader and Steve McKinnon and I had a long conversation last week talking about their proposals, getting an understanding of what were the core issues that were important to them, and putting forward from our own perspective what we think are the core issues that are important for Canadians, for Quebecers. It was a fruitful conversation, and we are very open and keen to continuing that discussion with the bloc. At the same time, we continue to have very fruitful and productive and constructive conversations with the NDP. I'm in close touch with my counterpart. Many of my colleagues are in close touch with their counterparts as well. And, you know, we're proud of our government's record in passing some historic legislation for Canada and Canadians, working collaboratively with the NDP. Dental care, free contraceptives, free diabetes medication, also the Green Industrial Transformation Investment Tax Credits. These are really, really important measures that are, you know, transforming Canada in a positive way. We did that working collaboratively with the NDP, and we're definitely having conversations with them as well about ways that we can continue to work together.
Thank you. Are you bringing up the fact that you're talking with the NDP because you're going to start courting their support again because you are saying no to the bloc and you're not going to be meeting this OAS demand?
Not at all. We really take as our starting point what is good for Canada and Canadians. Our starting point is talking to actual Canadians, talking to individual Canadians in our constituencies, talking to people who represent them. I've been having good conversations with union leaders and business leaders. I know my colleagues have as well. And with that as a starting point, we are then really open to looking for partners in this Parliament so that we can get the work of Canada, the work for Canadians done.
Kate?
Good morning, Ministers. Kate McKenna from CBC News. Just to follow up on my colleague's question, will your government be presenting a counteroffer to the bloc this week, one that boosts benefits for seniors but at a lower cost?
As I said, we have a real open door. We have been having constructive and very concrete conversations with both the bloc and the NDP. I'd be ready to have conversations with the Conservatives if they'd like. Seriously, there are some things that we agree with them on too, and we did work together during COVID with the Conservatives. So, you know, our view is every single person in Parliament is there because Canadians elected them. And every single person in Parliament is there because Canadians elected them to work for them every day in a challenging time for Canada and the world. We have our own very clear view about what our values are and what we need to do for Canadians. And we are open to working constructively and creatively with other members of Parliament to get that done. We recognize that we're in a minority in Parliament, and that means we need to be flexible and creative. But we also recognize that minority parliaments can get a lot done. We have gotten a lot done in a minority position. And historically, minority governments have gotten a lot done. I think, I think everyone is proud of the work that Lester B. Pearson and his government got done in a minority.
And how much longer is the government prepared to see the House tied up with privilege motions, and what options are you considering going forward?
Look, I just think it is appalling and ridiculous what we're seeing in the House of Commons. And I think it is really disrespectful to Canadians and disrespectful to our democracy. We need to step back for a minute and recognize what a big deal it is to have a democracy. How lucky we are as a country to govern ourselves this way. And I'm grateful to the generations of Canadians who've built this incredibly complicated, incredibly wonderful machine of democratic government. I don't take that for granted for a single moment. And so it makes me frustrated and it makes me angry to see just the disrespect for constituents, the disrespect for Parliament that the Conservatives are demonstrating.
That's not to say, I agree with everything that Chrystia said, but that's not to say that work isn't continuing. I mean, we're continuing to roll out our dental care program. We're continuing to move forward on the disability benefit. We're here today announcing new measures on housing. So there are still ways to get things done. But commenting on your question and perhaps your previous question, I mean, this is not new. This is a pattern. We have a leader of the opposition who is trying to convince Canadians that Canada is broken while simultaneously trying to do things to break it. On Finance Committee, where he was before he was leader, and what has continued since he has become leader, the Conservatives have not studied a budget in 3 years. They haven't studied a fall economic statement in 3 years. The role of the opposition is not just to oppose. It's supposed to be to propose solutions and to work for Canadians. That is a role that they have decided to vacate in their present form. And as we saw at the committee level and as we will see in the House, the majority of parliamentarians are here to get work done and to deliver for our constituents back home. So, I mean, it's easy to say that the Conservatives will remove this dilatory tactic if we do X, Y, or Z, but they're actually looking for dilatory tactics. They're not looking for solutions for Canadians, and that's just the world we're living in with this particular leader and his view on how Canada should be governed.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump in if I may, because we're surely running out of time, and we have 2 more questions in the room and a couple online. So if we could just move ahead and try and keep our questions tight and our answers tight too, Mac.
Hi, Ms. Freeland. Will there be a fall economic statement? Should Canadians expect that there'll be new spending measures in there? So it could be a conference motion. And if you're feeling generous on making some news, just tell us what day it's going to be too. That'd be great as well.
I'm feeling generous, but my generosity does not extend that far. So we are working hard on a fall economic statement. That is one of the things that we're talking about with the NDP and the Bloc. It is certainly something that we're talking about with Canadians. That is work that we started to do really the day after tabling the budget. We've been having a lot of discussions, a lot of conversations across the country with union leaders, with business leaders, with Canadians in all walks of life. And I do just want to emphasize that even as those conversations happen, even as we are frustrated and appalled by the spectacle the Conservatives are making of Parliament, the work of our government continues. And I want to give you guys 2 examples. So, since the House came back into session, Finance has announced, I've announced 2 hugely significant measures which are going to happen no matter what. and that is the 30-year amortizations for insured mortgages for first-time home buyers and for everyone buying a new build, and raising the limit to 1.5. That is transformative in the life of millions and millions of Canadians, and I know that because I have heard from them. We also have we announced last week, the Canada Carbon Rebate. That is $2.5 billion going back to Canadian small and medium-sized businesses. In Ontario, it means a business that employs 10 people is going to get $4,000. A business that employs 499 people is going to get $200,000. This is real money for our businesses at a time when they need it. Those are two really, really meaty measures. If I were today presenting a fall economic statement that contained those two measures as our headline measures, I can assure all of you, you'd have a lot to write about and a lot to put on your programs. So we're doing a lot, and we're being thoughtful and creative about the things, about looking at areas where we can move ahead and not be blocked by, playground tactics.
Follow-up, Mac?
You're mentioning playground tactics. I keep hearing these rumors, so I want to put it to you. Is your government considering proroguing Parliament?
No.
Dylan Robertson, go ahead.
Minister Freeland, your government has more to roll out in the FES you just mentioned. What are the factors that you're weighing in constructing the FES to maintain the confidence of the House?
I'll be very basic. Our focus in the FES is going to be the very clear economic plan we laid out in the budget. Our focus is fairness for every generation, and we deliver that by getting more homes built faster, by acting on affordability for Canadians, and by acting to drive economic growth, and doing all of that from a strong fiscal foundation. And listening to the questions all of you have been asking today, you guys also are responding to what you're hearing from Canadians, and I would put all of your questions in that space. You've been asking about housing, you've been asking about growth, you've been asking about affordability. That's, our clear plan and direction. We put in place some important measures in the budget, and we are following through.
What are your thoughts on this block motion when you're talking about the budget plan that called for fiscal responsibility, that called for fairness for every generation, not just the wealthiest demographic in Canada?
Look, I think those are really important considerations, and in our meeting with our colleagues from the bloc, we explained that those are concerns our government has. I think when you go into any kind of negotiation, you have to know clearly what your values and your objectives are. But you also have to be open to really listening to the values and objectives of your counterpart. And where there is a true desire to reach a win-win outcome, a creative, flexible, and listening approach can go a long way.
We have one question on the line en français, and I'm hoping you're willing to just take it quickly, and then we can wrap up for the day. So I will unmute my colleague Olivier from TVA. Olivier, à vous.
Oui, bonjour. Vous avez dit à mon collègue assez clairement, Mme Freeland, que vous ne considériez pas proroger le Parlement. J'aimerais savoir toutefois si ça a été discuté, puis sinon, c'est quoi le plan pour dénouer l'impasse au Parlement présentement?
Mon réponse était claire et directe, et je n'ajouterai pas, je n'ai pas des choses à ajouter. Je dirais juste que on comprend l'importance de livrer la marchandise pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes. On comprend que avec le COVID, on a eu la plus dure récession après la Grande Dépression. C'était vraiment un choc psychologique, un choc social, mais aussi un choc économique. Et on a travaillé très, très fort jour et nuit pour essayer d'appuyer, d'accompagner les Canadiens et Canadiennes, les entreprises canadiennes et canadiennes après ce choc et d'améliorer notre économie après ce choc. On est très content que maintenant l'inflation est dans la fourchette cible du Banque du Canada pour 8 mois. C'est une grande chose. On est content que le Canada est le premier pays de G7 dans lequel le taux directeur est baissé pour la première fois, pour la deuxième fois, pour la troisième fois. Ce sont des moments très importants dans la vie quotidienne de Madame et Monsieur tout le monde. Et pour nous, la chose importante, c'est de chaque jour faire des choses qui vont améliorer la vie quotidienne des Canadiens et Canadiennes et pas de jouer les jeux parlementaires.
Et si je peux ajouter très rapidement, la question sur l'impasse est une question très pertinente. Il y a deux façons de la résoudre. La première, c'est que les conservateurs arrêtent de faire leur petit jeu politique à la Chambre des communes. La deuxième, c'est que le Bloc et le NPD acceptent de travailler avec nous pour arrêter ce petit jeu des conservateurs. Et j'ajouterais que les conservateurs ont probablement peur de ce qui s'en vient parce qu'ils savent qu'en arrêtant leur politique de petit jeu à la Chambre des communes, l'étape suivante, c'est de voter sur une des mesures phares du budget qui demande aux Canadiens les plus riches de payer un petit peu plus pour investir beaucoup plus dans le logement abordable, en particulier pour les plus jeunes Québécois. Alors, ils n'aiment pas ça parce que ça va mettre à la vue de tout le monde qui sont, au contraire, ils ne sont pas en faveur de demander aux plus riches de payer un petit peu plus pour construire plus rapidement plus de logements abordables, en particulier pour les plus jeunes Québécois.
Et j'ajouterais que les conservateurs ne veulent pas qu'on discute ici la réalité de l'économie canadienne. Les conservateurs voient qu'on a une amélioration réelle dans l'économie, que l'inflation est dans la fourchette cible du Banque du Canada, que le taux directeur se diminue et va continuer de se diminuer. Ce sont des bonnes nouvelles pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes. Ils vont continuer. Alors, les conservateurs ont pris la décision que la bonne nouvelle économique pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes, c'est une mauvaise nouvelle pour les conservateurs. Et pour cette raison, ils essaient de créer une distraction. Ils veulent qu'on parle du Parlement et pas de la vie réelle économique des Canadiens et Canadiennes. Nous, on préfère de travailler pour les Canadiens et Canadiennes, de parler de la vie réelle des Canadiens et Canadiennes.
Question toute simple en suivi. Simplement, je me demandais si vous avez eu des discussions avec le Bloc sur leur demande depuis que vous avez voté contre la motion, donc après le vote.
Oui, la réponse est oui. Il en a eu une il y a à peine quelques jours, la fin de la semaine dernière. Et j'en ai régulièrement, Chrystia aussi, et d'autres membres du gouvernement aussi. Oui, on en a régulièrement parce qu'on est un gouvernement minoritaire. Donc, si on veut faire les bonnes choses pour les Québécois et pour les autres Canadiens, bien, il faut travailler nécessairement avec les partis d'opposition, dont le Bloc et le NPD. Sur le Bloc, à nouveau, l'intention de M. Blanchette est bonne d'aider les aînés. Nous, ça a toujours été notre objectif d'aider les aînés les plus vulnérables. On le fait à plusieurs reprises au cours des dernières années. Ça a mené, entre autres, à une réduction de plus de 20 % du taux de pauvreté des aînés. Le problème avec le projet de loi de M. Blanchette, c'est que ce projet de loi donnerait moins d'argent à un aîné dans ma circonscription qui vit avec 20 000 $ pour joindre les deux bouts qu'à un couple qui gagne 150 000 $ de revenus de pension ensemble. Donc, c'est un problème d'équité important. Comment est-ce qu'on fait pour travailler ensemble pour s'assurer que les ressources du gouvernement canadien continuent d'appuyer les aînés les plus vulnérables?
OK, merci. À bonne journée.
Merci à vous.